Hey there, this is Seth Waters from Channel 9 coming to you from Building 112 with an awesome researcher to talk about a really interesting problem. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Hi, I'm Navendu Jain. I am a researcher at Microsoft Research, and my work focuses on extracting what we call actionable insights from unstructured data.
So, for those that don't know what unstructured data is, could you give us a little synopsis of what that is so people can get a sense of what the problem is?
Sure. So unstructured data essentially is prevalent in a lot of online services where we interact with customers and customers tell us how they're using our products, what do they like in our products, what do they don't like in our products, if we have any if competitors of those products, what kind of things they would like to see and how we should continuously try to absorb that feedback, take action on it so that customers get a good and if not great experience with our products.
So, essentially, you're trying to get actionable data from the comments section.
Correct, that's right. So essentially actionable, if you think in terms of actionable itself is a quite a wide term, because for actionable, if you talk to engineering teams, they would think in terms of actions as, hey, here is a problem, here is something that crashes the app on my customer's box or their device, we need to go fix it. If you're from the program management discipline, you would like to understand how we are inventing, we are spending a great deal of energy and effort in rolling out these new features, are customers liking them, what new things they would like to see, right? And then teams would like to have these KPIs such as CSAT, NSAT. They would like to know how we are doing, how customers are loving our products. So that's really, it's a very big dimension when you talk in terms of trying to extract this notion of what is actionable from all this great feedback that's coming from customers.
So, we have like really two huge problems, right? One is understanding unstructured text, because I mean, when it comes to language, people might not even be writing the thing correctly. They might be spelling things wrong. And then getting from that unstructured text to even this notion of something that's more semi-structured that we don't even know what the bounds are, because actionable, as you said, different things, different people. How do you even start to tackle this problem?
Absolutely, great question. So when you look in terms of unstructured text, right? So essentially, let's start from the beginning. Right? The customer comes to our portal, they download our operating system, they download our apps, they run them on their devices, right? So in the background, of course, with PII, all this information, duly confirmed and acknowledged by the customers, we are collecting some telemetry data to essentially see, how is the health of the system doing, how is the app doing, and then from time to time, for example, in Windows 10, we have these great features called UIF, or user-initiated feedback, where customer says, hey, I would like to give some information back to the app developers, back to Microsoft to say how they can improve our product. There is also system-initiated user feedback, or what's called SWIFT, where a system from time to time essentially say, hey, we see that you're using our Office product. Would you like to give us some feedback or how we are doing, right? So you have this very rich data coming in, both from telemetry as well as explicit customer input to us, right? Where they essentially say, hey, this is how I'm using the product, but I would like to see some changes that will make me more productive, right? As our leadership has also said, in all we do, we need to be customer obsessed, right? Essentially, really listening to them, obsessing about what can we do at our end to make the customer's experience really a compelling one, so that they get the maximum productivity from our service. So when we get all this data, right, then we from our engineering team's perspective, they would like to understand, we have all these different KPIs, different metrics inside our team. So given this rich feedback that's coming in, how should we start translating that feedback into improving those KPIs to see, are we meeting our customers' satisfaction, what they expect from products that we're building, from services we're building, right? And this is all covered essentially in one of my slides in my presentation, where all this sources of unstructured text coming in, and then we are trying to extract these, as I mentioned earlier, this notion of insights, whether they are problems for our developers to go fix them, how do we prioritize these problems in terms of suggestions, so our program managers can say, hey, here are the new specs of an existing feature we should roll out because that's what people would like to use.
Sure.
And here are some new features that in fact we don't have them yet, but customers are asking them from us, right? And if you think in terms of from our data science team's perspective, they're essentially saying, well, we are really trying to build this great world-class machine learning models which can automatically learn from what these customers are saying to us. So given this rich feedback, can we now go and drive building of those models, continuously improving those models so that the end results gets fed back into how we're delivering the products back to the consumer. Right?
So effectively, we start with let's just say an Excel spreadsheet. Let's just because it's probably with lines and lines of text. User Jim said this. User Jen said that. User Bill said this. User Sue said that. And then in the end, we have this product should have this kind of thing done to it, or this product has this problem with it, or this feature. That's what we're going for from there to there. So it feels like there's a huge gap. How would Sue Dev, let's just say Sue's watching this, I'm like, okay, I have a spreadsheet like that. How do I go from that to that?
Sure. So let's start with the baseline, right? So if you think in terms of if I, give you this particular problem, you actually come up with a good analogy. It's a spreadsheet of feedback data. Of course, we scrub all the PII data, so we don't get any customer names. We essentially only get some GUID, some hash of their metadata, and really what we focus on is their rich feedback that they give to us.
So for those that don't know, PII is personal identifying information.
Correct.
So we don't know who's saying what.
Correct.
We just know what the feedback was.
That's right. That's right. And that's really our focus, right? Because we really want to zoom in to say, customers across, all our apps, across geographies, across boundaries, how are they using our products,
Sure.
and what is their response, what is their input for us to improve the products, right?
Sure.
So let's start with the baseline. You get this unstructured text. The very first thing you would do is you would try to manually go through each and every one of these inputs to say, okay, what is this feedback about? Is it a notion of a complaint? Is something not working for the customer? Or maybe the customer really likes our product and they're giving us kudos to essentially say, hey, great job, Microsoft. This new app experience really blew my mind away, and I love it, and I tell all my friends about it.
Sure.
So, or it could be some suggestion to say, I was trying to use your product in this particular way, and it doesn't quite matched my expectations, or I actually I ended up encountering an error or an issue, and I would like you to take a look into it. Right.
Sure.
So essentially, you start with this manual review to say, okay, from this feedback, again translate that to actionable. So when I read something, again a human reading this particular feedback, and essentially saying, should I send this feedback to my developer, to my engineering team to say, here is a specific problem, and here is some information. Maybe I can just email that whole feedback to my developer to say, hey, can you also read it? And please, if you find that this is something that we haven't fixed yet, let's go fix it. Right? So then you essentially would go through this manual review, which, as you can imagine, doesn't scale, right? So essentially, but that is, that would be sort of starting baseline. So what you would ideally want to do is that humans, instead of spending the time reading the feedback, they should actually spend their time on working on it, taking action on this rich signal coming from the feedback, right? So that's really where all the work we have done, and we have a system called SysSieve that tries to make this process automated to the extent possible, so that we really get out of the box this actionable insights, actionable information, which is very fine-grained, so that developers can say, so this is exactly the problem that this feedback is saying, I need to act on it, right? So that's number one. And then number two essentially is that, of course, we have a large user base, and we'll get lots and lots of problems, right? So for our engineering teams, they have this key question that keeps on reoccurring over time is, what should we prioritize? We're getting lots and lots of things that we should fix, we should work on, but what is that one bug that we should fix that would make people love our products? What is that one new feature, right? So that's the analogy to say, can we now prioritize all this feedback coming in to say, if we do this one thing, can we make a majority of our customers happy, right? So really, think of a two-step process. From every feedback, understand what's actionable, and then when you aggregate all this feedback, you want to analyze to say, can we prioritize these work items so that, we are making our customers happy, we're making them productive, so they are satisfied and they love our products.
Somebody's obviously going to be, because if you're a Windows insider, every once in a while it says, how did you like that experience? So you can imagine how many of these things are coming in. How does someone that's watching do this with data that they have? Like I'm trying to think of Sue Dev again. She has this spreadsheet of 10 million comments that she clearly can never read, all in a single year. and then changing to actionable things. How does one? What's that process look like? Do you start by defining what's actionable? Do you put it through some system? I mean, give us a sense for that.
Good. So again, if you think in terms of defining the actionable, it's really you have to map it to the end scenario, right?
Okay.
So we're essentially let's take a concrete example. So engineering teams, they want to see that if a bug comes in, and that's suppose the bug is the number one priority, or that feedback essentially says customers are saying we keep hitting this bug. So then if you build a trend over time, have we started fixing things and and rolling out these fixes back to the user so that over time that trend goes down, right? So think of if that as the KPI, then you essentially want to translate all these feedback towards essentially saying how do I map this feedback towards those KPIs. So one concrete action item is we produce the notion of what we call problems. And think of problems translating into potential bugs. A problem essentially the definition is very simple. It literally says what is not working for the customer, for a user, and then from the engineering side, they would like to say, can I reproduce the problem, right? Or essentially, if this problem is hitting a lot of our user base, what are the characteristics common across? Can I correlate even the telemetry data? So let's then really defining this notion of, what the feedback has to saying either it's a problem, right, or it's suggestion. Again, for the PM team to say, here is some suggestion from the customer, or ask or request from the user to say, can this feature be improved, or can this feature be, evolved to work in a way that makes me more productive, right?
Cool.
Right. So similar in form of delighters, or what we call non-delighters. Delighters is something that customer says it's not something a problem for me. I'm not telling you something in terms of a suggestion, but I would just like to give you kudos. They could be positive, right? We love our product. Or they could be, negative as well, because they essentially say, well, this experience wasn't at all I expected.
Optimal, yeah.
Exactly, right? So then you can use those criteria, you can use those mappings to define, to say now a problem goes into bugs for an engineering teams, suggestions goes to our PM teams, these delighters, non-delighters go to teams who want to compute the CSAT and SAT metrics to say, overall how are a product doing. And then you can also start having some more richer information from this that you can start feeding into, think of features for machine learning models, right? So you can take the feedback, you transform it into features, and then these rich features can now be fed into existing models or build new models, and we can continuously improve them, right? So think of that as the mapping from feedback to these dimensions.
I see. And so Sisiv is the software that takes raw unstructured text and maps it into that.
That's right.
So how does it do that?
Okay, good. So if you think in terms of Sisiv, I mean the idea again is, and if you're interested, I can go into some history of how we started into this process.
Let's do it.
So let me start with the history first. So this was several years back. We were working with GFS. This was the team or the group that manages our data centers. And we were working with them on network reliability. So at that time, an ask came from someone at the VP level, the vice president level, to say, we have a large networking vendor who is offering to upgrade our older network devices or older network gear with their latest and greatest hardware devices to say, and this will hopefully, the intent is that will make our systems run faster, have more capacity, be more reliable, right? That was the intent. And then the question really was, before we sign this 8-figure check, right? Can we check if we are making the right decision, right? Is it really worth the upgrade?
Sure.
And if you look in terms of to answer that question, I mean the gist really is you have two device families, device A and device B. A is older, B is newer, and we have both. And you want to do a heads-to-heads comparison of cost, reliability, and everything. But how do you do that, right? You can essentially go ask human operators who work on this, and they will tell you, well, I fixed a problem last week on device A, so that's bad. Or, well, I fixed something on device B, so device B is bad, right? So it's very, very anecdotal driven. But what you would really like is a data-driven answer. So when we looked in terms of answering this question, we looked at these, what are called network tickets. So these are, think of diaries that our operators, our engineers write when they try, when they encounter a problem. So, a device, I was trying to to check why this device had failed. I did some diagnostics tests. I had some email IM conversations with the rest of the team. I copy pasted some device debug logs, and in the end, I tried something. I mean, think of analogy as a software. When we try to repro the steps, we tried some troubleshooting, and then in the end, we will document what was the resolution.
Sure.
Again, all unstructured text, numerical data. That's all dumped into this one, giant ticket that you want to go look into. Of course, it's manually very hard, intensive, and as humans, if we start looking at them, we'll make mistakes.
Yeah.
So what you would like to do is, it has this rich information because it will say, if device A failed or B failed, why did they fail? What are the problems? But then you want a scalable way so that a machine can automatically identify, what was the issue, why it failed, and are we doing a good job in fixing it?
Yeah.
Right? So I won't go into the details of all the things we tried, but the gist was that the outcome when we did all this analysis, we built a system to understand this free-form text inside these tickets. The answer came out as that device B is only half as reliable as device A.
Oh, I see.
So, which translates to the check you're writing, you should multiply that 8-figure amount by a factor of 2.5, because that's really going to cost us, right? For every old device we decommission, we have to buy at least 2 new devices.
Because one will fail half the time.
Exactly, to replace it. So, and needless to say that the group didn't go with that upgrade. Yeah. So that was good. I think that was a good humbling experience for us to say that, we went in and then, didn't try to look at some, human interviews and things to essentially just get some anecdotal data and then get done with it, but really worked on building a soundproof, data-driven solution that would go look at these, lots and lots of ticketing data and come up with the final answer, so that so you have a proof to say that you can trust our results because this is truly data driven.
I see.
Right.
And I love the sense of being able to look at, because we have a lot of data just floating everywhere, but I love the idea of getting unstructured text into actionable data. And you said Sisiv is supposed to help you do that. So as I'm sitting there, and let's just say Sue Dev is watching, and she's like, okay, is there like a for loop that I do it's a for each line, give it to Sisiv? How do I tell Sisiv what I want the output to look like? Do I have to pre-format my text anyway? Can you speak to that a little bit before we actually go through a demo? Okay,
good. So the way you want to think in terms of Sisiv is, I'll give you what I call the n equal to 1 analogy. Right? Okay. So if you think in terms of you only have a single piece of feedback text, a single sentence, what do you want to do with it, right? So from that single piece of text, think in terms of analogy to say, can you summarize that information which captures the important text, the important information inside that feedback, right? So that is for every n equal to 1, for every piece of feedback, if there is anything actionable, anything important, we want to bubble it up. So think in terms of the entire feedback we get. What we are trying to do is we're essentially trying to build a summary of what's truly important, right? And then this summary is in a structured form. So you can now apply any of your favorite BI tools, Excel, Power BI, pivot charts, other kinds of things, to now aggregate this information and prioritize it, based on your own group's policies or policy decisions. And overall, the way, if you think in terms of Sisiv, if I want to describe it in 2 lines, what we're trying to do is we are trying to, in an unsupervised way, so that it scales. So we're trying to look through your entire data and find out what is, as I said, what is truly important, right? Truly important, and we're then trying to encode this knowledge as, think of representing a knowledge as a knowledge base, right? And then when a new piece of information comes in, we are trying to then translate or interpret this. It's like you're trying to learn a new language, right? Same way, we are trying to machines understand human language.
Right.
Right. So the analogy really is, as a humans, when we want to say learn a new language, say French, right? What we would do is, if you write me an email in French, I would pick up a dictionary and I will look up every word, every phrase. I will look at the grammar and say, when I compose it, so set actually means this.
Yeah.
Right? Similarly with machines. So we teach them to say, in an unsupervised manner, can you go and automatically extract what is really the important information represent this information, and then I do this translation process to say, as you see this feedback, you have this notion of a dictionary, a knowledge base, and then you interpret whether it's a problem, whether it's a suggestion, whether it's a delighter, whether it's some rich features that you can now bubble up.
I see. So the system is using unsupervised learning to come up with structures, and then when it gets a new piece of information, it says, this is what I think the structure should be.
Correct.
Do we give it any feedback to make it also a supervised learning problem?
Yes. So essentially, there are two components, and this is analogous to in our conventional machine learning, we have an offline learning. Right? So similar, we do this unsupervised learning where we extract what's important and go to knowledge base, and then we have supervised learning, exactly where we show this is what the system understood, and we ask the user to say, can you give us feedback so we can improve our precision, our recall, our accuracy of the system to say, this is how incrementally can we keep on improving the knowledge we extracted, and that we showed to you.
Awesome. And so initially you get this jumble of data, you create some sort of structure out of it using unsupervised learning. Then you give it a new piece of information, and it says, this is what I think this is a delighter for this product, but it's actually a suggestion. Then you feed that back into the system, and then does the model get reworked, or is there a supervised learning model on top of the unsupervised learning one?
So there is supervised learning or we essentially think of supervised learning as one of the many components we have in the whole end-to-end pipeline.
I see.
Right. So essentially, we have a notion of NLP. We have a notion from a compiler space. We have a notion of context-free grammars.
Of course.
Right. And then so essentially, we go where the model itself can try to learn as much as it can from the input, but you, as say the domain expert, can also come in and essentially say, I have a very say from my reporting perspective or from my actionability perspective, I have a very set criteria in which I would like this input or this output from your system to be transformed in my way. And there, exactly as you said, you can give hints to the signal. You can explicitly encode how would you like that output to be. Right. So think of a system has many components which essentially work in an ensemble kind of a thing, which work in harmony to give you this end-to-end view. And then we give you flexibility that if you don't, as human domain experts, you can get a really good value right out of the box without making it, doing it tuning. But if you would like, you can give us feedback. You can go change the models, and then essentially you can say customize or tune it to your own specific domain.
I see. So there's a series of machine learning models and pipelines that happen.
Correct.
So there's some cleansing that's happening beforehand to remove PII. There's probably some grouping or some word counts, or I don't know what you do, that go into the NLP side of it, maybe some n-gram model, I don't know. And then you feed that into the next model, until you get something that's really tuned.
Correct.
Well, this sounds awesome. Do you have a demo you can show us?
Absolutely.
Let's do it. Okay, so we're at your desk now, and we're going to see sort of what this actually looks like in practice. So why don't you walk us through how this is done? By the way, what kind of program? It looks like we're doing stuff in Python.
Correct. Right.
Fantastic.
So we essentially we used Python as for the entire development process. It also has several .NET and C# components for us to really build the end-to-end system. So let's start with what our input looks like. So here's an example of input where our customers are giving us. Of course, this is all PII scrubbed, so we only focus on what the feedback is. So feedback, again, could, as we talked earlier, could be very incredibly noisy.
Yeah.
Right? I think the only structure is that there is no structure.
Right.
So you can think in terms of it may not adhere to grammar rules, could have punctuations or missing information that you have to stitch together. So let's start. For example, a customer input says I can text. There is not even an I can text, can't launch. And then there is some comment which essentially says, app, you can really add all your addresses and only once I want to log in. Start keeps on crashing. And this is a good example where you don't know, are you trying to open an app and starting that app crashes, or is it the start menu you're calling it as stat that's crashing, right? The 3D glasses are not heavy, so essentially you're giving us some positive reinforcement, but telling it in a negative way, right? So something is not too bad, right? And you also get kudos, Cortana is awesome, but you can also have lots of, this run-on feedback where you could talk multiple things to us. We're essentially talking about some software programs on one of our hardware devices, and then we would like to some sort of meetings on the calendar, and so on and so forth, right? So feedback could be as short as few words,
Yeah.
or it could be as long as a very one big
Paragraph,
large
yeah.
paragraph, but without any periods in it.
Yeah.
So right, essentially you think of it as a one big run-on
Run-on
sentence that
yeah.
keeps on going and going, right? So that's really the flavor of feedback, and really the idea really is that we are not, since we are not, there is no input or structure that we are asking customers to give us, and this is really the raw feedback that they would like to tell us, right? And our job is to make sure that there is rich information in this incredibly noisy data, but we still want to extract it, we want to make it actionable and use it, right? So now let me run the system. So this is what you give to the input to Sisiv, this unstructured feedback text.
Sure.
And then Sisiv, what it would try to do is from this data, it will try to infer, or what we'll call the notion of inference, of this insights, of this actionable information. What are the problems? What are suggestions? What are delighters? Right. So all this information. So I'm going to start the execution. The system goes and then starts analyzing all this data. Remember, it builds a knowledge base, and then it starts producing the output. And we have several output formats in which you can look at this kind of a data. Right. So let me start with you to something a very simple Excel view, and then we'll move on to more interactive Power BI dashboards later. Sure. Right. So here the system, what it found from the input feedback is that from all this information that we saw earlier from this input set of feedback records, we found about 20 problems, right? Mm-hmm. And remember, even a single feedback could have multiple things. It could say Cortana is awesome, but you say app XYZ doesn't work for me.
So there are two things in there.
Correct, or more than one, right? And then we see a lot of feedback like that. So here, what system has inferred is we found 20 problems, and then within these problems, we actually could give you very fine-grained information, whether it was a functional problem, right? So if something was not working correctly, it was a reliability problem, it was crashing, performance with security issues, or just performance problems, things are running slow, right? So we can zoom in to say, things are heating issues, or the one of the programs, the Bitdefender virus programs, was running pretty slow, right? Or when you look in terms of reliability, something was crashing for the customer, right? So we can give you so you can go within engineering organizations, we have a performance team, a reliability team, a security team, right? So you can, given this feedback, out of the box, you can start sending the right feedback to the right team to say, here is the concrete actions you want to take.
And even with the reliability one, the third item there, they conflict and disable, I mean, that's not a word, I don't think, with Service Pro, which kills the awesome. You can tell that this is effectively a reliability problem,
Correct.
Even though it's hard, I would have had a hard time as a human putting it in the right spot, but it feels like that's the right thing.
That's right, exactly, right? So machines can avoid this kind of ambiguity. In fact, they can learn to deal with ambiguity to say, can we go and understand the customer intent when they're trying to give us this whole feedback, right? Mm-hmm. So they can essentially really use ambiguity to say, what are the possible different ways I could interpret this? Mm-hmm. And then can I now build, in terms of output, a probability distribution to say, which is the most likely intent,
sure.
Right? So exactly. So that's one of the problems, and think of, again, problems as potential bugs. So you can now take this feedback to the user. Similarly with suggestions. Suggestions are saying, well, we like your product, but I would like to see some enrichment, some enhancement, some improvements in which I could use it, right? So in here particularly, the feedback is I want a particular app should fit onto the screen, right? Mm-hmm. I would like to use narrator also in setup and boot menu from what it already is, right? So again, if you think enough to give it to a human, it's hard for us to really pinpoint to say, yeah, I think it kind of means this, but what does it really? But as we can teach machines over time, they can say, well, yes, there could be several possibilities, but what is the most actionable output that I can derive from this kind of feedback?
So there might have been more text everywhere else around that, but it only pulled out the actionable text.
Exactly, okay. And that's really the key, right? That's essentially, we talked about cleansing earlier. So if you think in terms of this as a dual of cleansing, right? We are not trying to remove what's unimportant or useless information. We are trying to really zoom in on what's actionable, what's important from all this feedback text. And I think that that's really the key, because
Sure.
noise is an endless process. If you're trying to denoise the data, you can keep going on and on. But once you start zooming into what's important, things start bubbling up, which are really important.
Like, for example, the "we would like to have a staff calendar" might have been embedded in a long post that had several problems and a suggestion, but you're just pulling out exactly what is actionable.
Correct.
Got it.
That's right. So that's a notion of suggestion. And then we have a notion of a non-delighter. Non-delighter is a customer who is, not pleased with or not happy with the way things are working, right? So essentially here, you can go into more fine-grained areas.
Sure.
Where this is a security issue, right? The password policy translation is not correct. So they are not very specific to say, whether it was, an error with configuring it or something else. It just essentially says that it's not correct. That means that, we as an engineering team needs to look into, but having from all this big, large amount of feedback, can we zoom into for each individual team to say, what is my feedback that pertains to me? So I don't need to worry about other things. Really, can you tell me what is really important or actionable for me to act upon?
Because not only are you putting it into the right buckets, but you're delivering the bucket that people are interested in.
Correct.
Got it.
And then within that bucket, we actually even go down, and that's where I'll show you the structure next, where we can now see, the problem. It's not just I'm telling you, hey, there is some problem. I'll actually tell you that here's a problem with what we call the notion of entity, right? So here in this particular case, the password policy translation is the entity. So think of entity as, an English analogy is the noun.
Yeah.
Right? What is that product? What is that feature that the customer is or service or customer is complaining about? And the state, think of analogy again as a verb or an adjective or an adverb. We don't use those things, but it's good to think of things, think in terms of those ways. For example, in English we say a sentence typically has a noun and a verb. Right? Similarly, when you start thinking in terms of feedback, we are essentially saying there is some entity that the customer is talking about. They're having maybe problems with, say, some Skype calling. That's the entity. And then they might tell us what is the exact issue that they might be having. Essentially, maybe the audio quality could be better, or I see some jitter or lag sometimes, right? So that's the state, the context in which they're describing that particular issue. Right? So think of that as now, both from a routing perspective, you can take the feedback, route it to the right teams so that they can act upon. And then not just that, we can go deeper into what really is that feedback all about. Right? So I'll show you a little busy chart, but this is good for understanding, and then we'll go to a Power BI interactive dashboard, right?
Okay.
So here, if you look on this particular column S, which is the analyzed text, so this is really the text which had the actionable information from this unstructured data.
So this is the actionable items from the unstructured text.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. Right. And then from there we will start inferring, extracting what is important. Right. So here, if you think in terms of virus program, by Bitdefender virus program is pretty slow. Right. So system will essentially infer that here is the entity, and here is a corresponding state that entity is associated with, and that's what the customer is telling us, right? So now, if you think in terms of prioritization, you can say, if I ask you the question, give me the top 3 programs or products or services that our customers are complaining about, right? So then what you would do is, you would run Sisiv on it, right? Look at this fine-grained information view, and then and then you just do a group by. Yeah. It's just some simple aggregate now, right? Simpler. And then here's another good example where customer feedback was heating issues. They didn't tell us what product or what service. We could go look at the metadata in some cases to say maybe that gives some maybe what device they are using or some battery pack. So here what the system does is essentially tries to learn to say, well, I didn't find any entity. Remember, we didn't tell it anything. Yeah. I didn't find any entity, but a customer gave me a problem, right? So essentially here the inference is it's a problem. And the particular state it's about heating, right? So now I will put a placeholder as an unknown entity, and if you as a domain expert may have some metadata that you can replace this placeholder with, say, for example, they were having problems with some OEM device or what kind of hardware. Right? So that's another example. Right? So that's about it in terms of the fine-grained information. Let me show you, the how do you have rich interactions with this data. So here I'm going to show you this. Run on a little bit large data set, the Power BI dashboard which our teams see as the output when they run Sisiv on their input data.
I see. So that is the source of the data that spreadsheet-like thing that you generated?
I mean, think of spreadsheet as
Data source.
as one of the data sources, right? Typically, our feedback is millions of records every day.
Oh,
So they won't fit in a spreadsheet, right? So for that you need some large, storage systems such as in our cloud platform, such as Azure, or our internal cloud platform such as Cosmos, so that all this, and again, this is not feasible for a human teams to go and look at it.
Sure.
So you really have now these services. So Sisiv now runs both. You can run it on your machine, but it also runs as a service in Cosmos. It runs as a service in Azure. It runs as a service in our Azure Data Lake for our public customers to use. So then what you really need to just do it, you can just need to plug in your input data. And out of the box, Sisiv will give you these actionable insights, and as think in terms of rich Power BI dashboards that you can now start playing with and interacting with, right?
So Azure Data Lake now is this huge pipeline, because let's just say every day you scrape the forums, and then you put that into the pipeline for Azure Data Lake, and then the process goes through, and then in the end, the data sort of is put into wherever it's put, and then you can visualize it inside of
Absolutely, exactly. I think it's really that notion of even the process of extracting the data can be automated, right? So now teams can look in their daily dashboards to say, how are things trending, right? So for example, we have, Skype team is one of the big users of Sisiv, same with Windows and MSIT, even Office 365, right? So where they actually have built dashboards where they plug in the data source, and then in the background, Sisiv is analyzing all the data, and it continuously refreshes those views to say, what is trending, what is hot right now.
Right.
And if we fix some things, have we started seeing improvements on it, right?
And so this is an example of the type of dashboard you can build on that data, but it's not necessarily a representation of all you can do.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's see what you got.
Okay, so here is, again, think of this as the starting view of what, from the feedback data, what all issues we find, right? So think in terms of satisfaction, as when people were satisfied with the product, gave us delighters. Dissatisfied, we're thinking of putting in these three higher level categories to say. Dissatisfied means either you were not pleased or happy with our product, or you actually were having some problems. So if you look at the legend on the top, we are saying problems in red, and non-delighters all go to this bucket. Satisfaction is people liked our product, and then suggestions is, it's not a notion of like or dislike, but they would like to see our products evolved in a specific way.
As programmers, though, suggestions means we're doing something already right, so we have a pretty good base. So I like these numbers. Look pretty good. I mean, when you're comparing the dissatisfied versus the satisfied suggestions, that's pretty good.
Yes.
Ratio.
Right. So, and then beyond that, right, essentially you want to start digging into, again, this notion of teams to say, is it a usability issue, functionality issue, reliability issue, and think of perceived value as what, in the industry we have these NSAT, CSAT metrics, customer satisfaction, net satisfaction. So, how is the perceived value for a product on which we got this feedback across our customer base, right? So this gives you very, very fine-grained, detailed information that, there are some privacy issues, some compatibility issues, some accessibility issues, right? That where customers may be telling us that, hey, I would like to give you some suggestions so that you can improve how this product, right? How this product behaves, or how my experience with it.
Sure.
Right. Here are some concept problems, and then you can, again, we still give you the ability to go look at the raw feedback if you need to, right? Because as humans, we may want to go and essentially say, okay, let me just look at some representative, some sampling to say, okay, how would this relate? Is this giving me some other information that I could potentially use, right? So
now, is this all of the information you fed into this particular dashboard, or is it a subset?
So this is just, think of one of the views, right? So from the Excel I showed you, that's a Sisiv output.
Sure.
And then what this is doing is, think of a Power BI template which essentially says, what are the different pivots by which I can show you the data, so that you think of a reporting structure that now different teams may essentially say, oh, I want to look at how dissatisfied versus satisfied our customers are, or I want to look at the overall trends, or how it's distributed across these different feature areas, right? And then we can start looking into this again, double clicking and going one level deeper to say, what are the different things that people are talking about our products. And here it really is this notion of let me click on Actionable, where things are really talking about problems that having with our particular products, right? So here essentially there was some issue with the Outlook that people weren't able to see a specific mail or some specific feature they were trying to access, right? Issues with mobile reliability, where you can now go and double click to say I can't record sound while I was filming, right? So we can even give you that particular slice of feedback that was associated with this, right? So you are the engineering team. The way you want to use this kind of a view to say that now I want to prioritize how should I go about fixing these products or issues, right? So I can essentially say, let me look at the biggest bucket where I'm looking at these particular problems, right? Some features are missing, right? That little words crashes on launch, and simple apps takes a long time to load. So all these problems, then I can go and essentially say, okay, which is the biggest bucket that I should first chase, fix it, so that I can improve productivity for a large fraction of my customers. Then I should go to the next one, and next one, so on and so forth, right? So this prioritization is a key for a lot of our engineering teams to say, lots of feedback coming in, how should we take a look at it and really make sure that we fix the first thing that is impacting a large fraction of our user base. Right?
This is pretty amazing. So, I mean, I'm sure there's tons more we can talk about, but where can people go? Is this something that people can use, or is this something we just want to show, like, look, we're really obsessed on making sure that you're happy? Is Sisiv something that people can go download and check out?
Yes, absolutely. So for Sisiv, we have links where you can go and download it. Currently, it's a Microsoft service. So let me just pull up the links. So,
and let's bring it over to the other window so people can see it. There we go.
Right. So here, currently within Microsoft, you can go and download Sisiv from Codebox. We have the entire code base, case studies, presentations, even videos. We have given 3 Sisiv workshops, attended by about 70, 80 folks across all of Microsoft. Cool. And we have all the videos there. There's a DL, Sisiv DL at Microsoft.com, where you can go and do any discussions, ask questions, give feedback, input. And then, as I mentioned, we have services running across Azure, Cosmos, Data Lake, where you can just literally plug in your data and get Sisiv output, automatically analyzed and generated from your input data. And that's, essentially, today Sisiv is, in fact, the most widely used text analytics systems for customer feedback, from across all of Windows to Skype, MSIT, Office 365. That teams, in fact, even in Azure and Bing are piloting it. So we have quite a large user base. For external release, we're in discussions with teams to offer it as a public service. But currently, those are confidential discussions for now. But hopefully, we want to release this to our external customers as well.
And this is awesome because there's people that are going to ask, well, I want to do this. But even because the answer will come maybe soon, maybe later, but the awesomeness of this is how we've spent a long time wanting to understand the feedback that people are giving us to all of our products, and we've gone through some serious engineering because this is not a trivial thing. Well, this has been awesome. Well, thanks so much for spending some time with us. So we have been learning all about, and sorry, I'm turning around because I'm looking at you. We've been learning all about Sisiv and how to actually do actionable work on your comments to our products. My name is Seth Juarez. Again, I'm in Building 12. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.